This is the story of Gary, Indiana, and how what happened there is quietly spreading across an entire state while every official statistic says it's winning. Indiana ranks 9th in the United States for projected population growth. It is 8th in manufacturing output. The state's GDP just hit $442 billion, an all-time high. Unemployment sits below 4%. And yet, in the same 5-year window those numbers were posted, more than half of Indiana's 92 counties lost population. 21 of them shrank by over 5%. Hospitals are closing. Cities that had 80,000 residents in 1960 now have 45,000. The headline number says, "Indiana is rising." The map tells you Indiana is hollowing out, quietly, county by county, behind the shadow of a single growing capital. Most states that fall apart loudly. Detroit's bankruptcy, Flint's water, Camden's homicide rate. You see the collapse on cable news because the collapse is photogenic. Indiana is different. Indiana is falling apart the way a wooden barn collapses, slowly, in the rain, when no one's watching. There is no single dramatic event, no one moment to point to. Instead, there is a half-century of small subtractions. A factory here, a graduating class that does not come back, a pharmacy closing on Main Street, a coroner working overtime. Add them up across 92 counties, and you get a state that is statistically thriving and structurally rotting at the same time. The first place to see it is not the capital. It is a city named after a steel man. Gary, Indiana was built by United States Steel in 1906. The corporation was the world's first billion-dollar company, and its founding chairman, Elbert H. Gary, the man who gave the city its name, had also built U.S. Steel into an industrial empire before a single shovel broke ground on the Calumet region's southern shore. The plan was clean. A model industrial town planted at the southern tip of Lake Michigan along what would become Interstate 65, designed to feed the national appetite for structural steel. By 1960, that plan had worked beyond anyone's projection. Gary Works, the U.S. Steel Gary Works Mill, became the largest integrated steel mill on the North American continent. 30,000 workers passed through its gates every shift. The city's population sat at 178,000. The Jackson family raised their children in a small white house at 2300 Jackson Street, 2 blocks from a movie theater that ran first-run films. The sidewalks were full. The schools were integrated, ahead of most of the country. Gary called itself the Magic City. Then automation arrived. Not collapse, automation. By 1990, the same Gary Works mill that had employed 30,000 people was producing more steel than ever, with 6,000 workers. By 2015, that figure was down to 5,100. The mill never closed. The mill just stopped needing people. Globalization accelerated what automation began. Foreign steel undercut domestic production. White flight followed Mayor Richard Hatcher's 1967 election, then accelerated through the 70s. Federal money kept the city afloat through the 80s, and then the federal money dried up. The numbers today are clinical. Gary's population in 2026 is 66,829. That is a 63% collapse from its peak. The median household income is $38,700. The poverty rate is 33%. 1 in 3 residents lives below the federal poverty line. The city's largest abandoned building, the City Methodist Church on 6th Avenue, was once the most expensive Methodist church ever built in America. Today it has no roof. Trees grow through the floor. Filmmakers rent it for $10,000 a day to shoot apocalypse scenes. Transformers was filmed there. A Pearl Jam music video was filmed there. An episode of A Good Day to Die Hard was filmed there. The same neighborhood includes Roosevelt High School, closed in 2012, and the Palace Theater, abandoned since 1972. And here is the uncomfortable part. Gary is not Indiana's worst story. Gary is Indiana's earliest story. What happened to Gary between 1960 and 2026 is happening right now in slower motion to a chain of cities across the rest of the state. The auto towns have already started. Drive 40 miles east of Indianapolis and you arrive at Anderson. In 1960, Anderson had 70,165 residents. General Motors operated 7 plants inside the city limits. Delco Remy made starters and generators. Guide Lamp made headlights. Together, those plants employed roughly 25,500 manufacturing workers in a city of 70,000, and UAW, Local 662, represented thousands of them, negotiating contracts that built the middle class of Madison County. Almost every adult man in town either worked at General Motors or had a brother who did. Then came the slow grind. Manufacturing employment in Anderson and surrounding Madison County fell from 25,500 jobs in 1970 to 14,000 by 1995 to 7,500 by 2006. That is a 70% collapse over 36 years. In 2007, the Guide Corporation factory shut its gates for good. It was the last plant related to General Motors in a city built by General Motors. The local newspaper wrote that all remnants of General Motors would be gone from a city that was once a proud standard bearer. Anderson's population today is 54,788. That is a 22% loss from peak, and it is still falling. Anderson is not unique. Marion, Indiana, 60 miles further north, hosted a General Motors stamping plant that was the economic engine of Grant County for half a century. Its payroll alone, $75 million a year, paid 1/15 of the county's entire tax base. The plant downsized during the 2008 bailout era and never recovered. Kokomo, home of the Chrysler Torque Flight transmission, saw Delphi Corporation, also known as Delphi Automotive Systems, slide into bankruptcy in 2005, and the company shed 5,000 jobs across its Indiana operations. New Castle, the original birthplace of Maxwell Motors and one of Chrysler's 6 founding plants, lost its factory entirely. The local high school used to be called New Castle Chrysler High School. They removed the word Chrysler in 2011 after the company stopped operating in town. You can drive from Gary to New Castle and never leave a county that lost more than 10% of its working-age population since the year 2000. Each city looks fine from a single intersection. The Walmart still works. The Speedway is open, but the high school graduating class is half what it was in 1990, and almost none of those graduates plan to stay. Which brings us to the second engine of Indiana's quiet decline: the people who finish college and never come back. Indiana is actually one of the best states in the country at attracting young people. The state ranks 3rd in the entire nation for net migration of college freshmen, behind only Pennsylvania and Arizona. Purdue University and Indiana University Bloomington pull thousands of out-of-state students every year. The state imports talent at scale, and then it loses that talent on an even bigger scale. According to the Indiana Chamber of Commerce report called the Leaking Talent Pipeline, nearly 40% of Indiana's roughly 60,000 college graduates leave the state within 1 year of graduation. Over half are gone within 5 years. Only 29% of 18-year-old Hoosiers will complete college and remain in Indiana to work. The state ranks 37th in associate degree or credential attainment, below the national average of 51.9%. The Lilly Endowment, Indiana's largest philanthropic institution, has poured hundreds of millions of dollars into workforce retention and community development programs, attempting to reverse that trend. And even with that institutional firepower, the numbers keep moving in the wrong direction. The math is straightforward. A state that imports young, ambitious, mobile people and exports them after 4 years isn't a magnet. It's a turnstile. Engineering and communication technology graduates are the most likely majors to leave. These are also the majors that build the next generation of high-wage industry. So Indiana subsidizes the education of the workers. Texas, Illinois, Colorado, and California will hire. The consequences compound. Counties that lose young adults lose birth rates. Counties that lose birth rates lose schools. Schools that close take with them the property values, the tax base, and the next generation of teachers. The Indiana Business Research Center has reported that Northwest Indiana's population declined every single year between 2010 and 2017, even though births still outnumbered deaths in the region. Domestic outmigration was so heavy it overwhelmed natural growth. That same pattern's now showing up in east-central Indiana, in southern Indiana, and along the Wabash. Rural Indiana isn't aging gracefully. It's being abandoned by the demographic that pays for everything else. But none of this would matter, not really, if the state's headline numbers didn't keep saying Indiana is winning. So how is the headline number staying positive? The answer is one city sitting in the geographic center of the state, doing all the heavy lifting and hiding the rest of the rot. Indianapolis and its surrounding donut counties, Hamilton, Boone, Hendricks, and Johnson, produce roughly half of the state's GDP. Marion County alone holds almost 1 million people. Hamilton County, immediately to the north, is the wealthiest county in Indiana and one of the fastest growing in the entire Midwest. Eli Lilly and Company expanded its Lebanon manufacturing campus in 2025 with a $9 billion build-out. Cummins, Salesforce, and Roche all maintain major operations within 30 miles of Monument Circle. The Indiana Economic Development Corporation markets these wins constantly through ribbon cuttings, press releases, and record investment announcements, and the aggregate numbers justify it. In aggregate. That single metropolitan economy makes Indiana look healthy in aggregate. When the state reports 4% GDP growth, what's actually happening is Indianapolis grew 6 or 7%, and the rest of the state quietly contracted. When Indiana adds 20,000 jobs in a quarter, those jobs are concentrated in a 50-mile radius around Monument Circle. The other 90% of the state's land area, 87 of 92 counties, sees minimal job growth, slight population decline, or outright collapse. This is the same dynamic that hit Michigan between 1970 and the Detroit-bankruptcy filing in 2013. Detroit hid the decline of Flint, Saginaw, Pontiac, and Bay City for almost 2 decades, until Detroit itself stopped being able to carry the math. Indianapolis isn't at that point yet. Indianapolis is the version of Detroit before the wheels came off, the version where the central city's still pulling enough weight to make the state look fine. But the historical pattern, a single-engine state, a hollowed-out periphery, the capital city covering for it until it can't, is sitting right there in Indiana in the year 2026, hiding behind a headline GDP number. And then there's the part of the decline that does not even appear in the GDP figure. In 2023, the most recent year with finalized data, Indiana recorded 2,089 drug overdose deaths. Roughly 75% of those involved fentanyl. The state's age-adjusted overdose mortality rate that year was 34.2 deaths per 100,000 people, high enough to rank Indiana in the top 15 states in the country, despite a recent decline from a 2022 peak of 41. Fentanyl deaths follow industrial decline the way mold follows water damage. The CDC county-level overdose data shows the densest clusters tracking precisely with deindustrialized Rust Belt geography. Lake, LaPorte, Madison, Delaware, Vigo. These are also the counties where hospitals are closing, where ambulance response times are climbing, where the average shift at the county coroner's office now includes pulling at least one body off a bedroom floor. In some Indiana counties, drug overdose has overtaken motor vehicle accident as the leading cause of accidental death for adults under 50. The decline in the headline overdose number, the so-called fentanyl supply shock from a Chinese precursor crackdown, is genuine, but it does not reverse the demographic damage. A county that lost a fifth of its young adults to overdose in the past decade does not get them back. The funeral has already happened. The schools, the small businesses, the volunteer fire departments, those institutions do not recover the population they have already buried. This is what falling apart quietly actually looks like. Not a crash, a drain. Step back from the individual cities and the individual statistics. The pattern is clear. Indiana has one growth pole, Indianapolis. It has 87 other counties drifting in the opposite direction. It has a steel city, Gary, that has lost 2/3 of its population. It has an auto belt, Anderson, Marion, Kokomo, Newcastle, that has lost 70% of its manufacturing jobs. It has a brain drain that exports 40% of every graduating class within 12 months. It has a fentanyl crisis that disproportionately hits the same counties that lost factories. And it has a state government celebrating record GDP because, in aggregate, the math still works. These are, in the language of urban researchers, shrinking cities, a pattern repeating itself from the Calumet region to the Ohio border, in a state that officially insists it is not shrinking at all. The dangerous part, the genuinely uncomfortable part, is that there is no single moment when this becomes a crisis. Michigan did not collapse on the day Detroit filed Chapter 9. Michigan collapsed over 40 years of slow subtraction, and Detroit was just the moment when the math finally refused to work. Indiana is somewhere around year 30 of its own version of that subtraction, and the math is still working, barely, because Indianapolis keeps adding what the rest of the state keeps losing. What happens when Indianapolis stops being able to carry the load? That is the question no one in the State House is willing to ask, because the answer is the same answer Michigan got. Quietly is how decline starts. Loudly is how it ends. And Indiana, in 2026, is still in the quiet phase. This was Indiana falling apart, county by county, behind a single growing skyline. If this changed how you see the state, the channel covers a different American city in slow collapse every week. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.